All right, everyone. Episode 33 of TeflonStoic's Journey to Level 60. Playing WoW hardcore as a holy paladin and learning about Stoic philosophy along the way. Let's go ahead and get started.
Favors. You complain that you've met someone who is ungrateful. If this is the first time you've experienced this, you should be thankful either for your good luck or your caution. But in this case, being cautious won't help much, except to make you less generous. Because if you want to avoid the risk of someone being ungrateful, you might stop giving altogether. And then instead of losing favors to others, you'll lose them to yourself. It's better to receive nothing in return than to stop doing favors. Even after a bad harvest, one should plant seeds again, because often years of poor crops can be made up for by 1 year of good growth. To find one grateful person, it's worth dealing with many ungrateful ones. No one is so perfect at giving that they aren't sometimes deceived. It's good for a traveler to wander off the path so they can learn to find it again. After a shipwreck, sailors still go back to sea. A banker isn't scared from the market by one cheater. If we gave up on everything that caused trouble, life would quickly become dull and lazy. But in your case, this situation might encourage you to be even more generous. When the outcome of an action is uncertain, you have to keep trying in order to eventually succeed. I've already discussed this topic in detail in the volumes I've written called On Favors. But I think we should explore another question that hasn't been made clear enough. If someone who helped us later harms us, does that cancel out the help and free us from being grateful? You could also ask, what if the harm done later is greater than the help given before? If you're looking for a fair and strict judgment, you'll find that it balances one act against the other and says, even if the harm is greater than the favor, we should still give credit for any favor that remains after considering the harm. The harm might be greater, but the favor was given first, so the timing should also be taken into account. There are some cases so clear that I don't need to remind you to consider things like how willingly was the favor given and how reluctantly was the harm done, since both favors and harms depend on the intention
and cheers to you, my friend. Not
I
only
didn't really want to give the favor, but I was convinced by respect for the person, or because they insisted, or because I hoped for something in return. Our feelings about any obligation depend on the spirit in which the favor was given. We don't measure the size of the gift, but the quality of the goodwill behind it. So let's be clear. The first action was a favor, and the later action, which outweighed the first, was an injury. A good person will look at both sides and choose to be generous by giving more weight to the favor and less to the harm. But a more lenient judge, which is the kind I'd rather be, will tell us to forget the harm
Where would you like to fly to?
favor. Surely you might say it's fair to give thanks for a favor and to seek retribution, or at least feel resentment for a harm. That's true when the harm and the favor come from two different people, but if it's the same person, the harm is lessened by the favor they provided. In fact, someone who should be forgiven, even if they hadn't done any good deed, should receive more than just leniency if they made a mistake after doing something good. I don't value favors and injuries equally. I think favors are worth more than injuries. Not everyone understands how much they owe for a favor. Even a thoughtless person might know they owe something, especially right after receiving it, but they don't realize how much they're truly indebted. Only a wise person knows exactly how to value everything, because a fool, even with good intentions, either repays less than they owe, or does it at the wrong time, or in the wrong way. What they should have repaid, they waste or lose. There's a wonderfully precise way of talking about these things. An old way of expressing certain actions with symbols that clearly outline what our duties are. We often say, he has made a return for the favor. Making a return means voluntarily giving back what you owe. We don't say he has paid back the favor, because payback is used when someone is demanded to pay. When they pay unwillingly, when they pay in any situation or through someone else, we don't say he has restored the favor or settled it. We never use words that are really about repaying money. Making a return means offering something to the person who gave you something. The phrase implies a voluntary act. The person who makes such a return has done so willingly. A wise person will think carefully about all circumstances, how much they received from whom, when, where, and how. That's why we say only the wise person knows how to make a true return for a favor. Moreover, only the wise person knows how to give a favor. Someone who enjoys giving more than the receiver enjoys getting. Now someone might think that this is one of those surprising statements we Stoics like to make, the kind the Greeks call paradoxes, and they might say, do you really believe only the wise person knows how to return a favor? Do you think no one else knows how to pay back a debt to a creditor, or how to pay the full price when buying something? To avoid any misunderstanding, let me tell you that even Epicurus says the same thing. Redridge, one of his followers,
So
also
you can
said
play
that
music.
a wise person knows how to return a favor.
Alright, we're going back to stocks. Again, more stockades, more stoicism.
Is a true friend, and yet part of love and friendship is returning favors, and it's something that happens more often than true friendship. That same person might also be surprised when we say there's no true loyalty except in a wise person, as if they don't believe the same thing. Or do you think someone who doesn't know how to return a favor can be truly loyal? These critics should stop doubting us as if we're making impossible claims. They should understand that true honor resides in the wise person, while the general crowd only has a shadow or appearance of honor. Only the wise person knows how to return a favor. Even a fool can try to return it as best as they know how, but their fault is not in lacking the will, but in lacking the knowledge. The desire to repay isn't something that can be taught. The wise person will compare everything carefully because the same action can be more or less significant depending on the time, place, and reason. Sometimes, spending a fortune on a palace doesn't achieve as much as a small gift given at the right time. It makes a big difference whether you give freely or help someone in need, whether your generosity saves someone or helps them get started in life. Sometimes the gift itself is small, but the impact is great. And what do you think is the difference between taking
Do a
something
quick
back
enchantment.
as offered and receiving a favor to return the favor? But let's not dive back into a topic we've already discussed. When balancing favors and injuries, the good person will judge as fairly as possible.
Max our intellect, and we're
Toward
going
the side
in.
of the favor. They will be more inclined to give more weight to the good. Moreover, in these matters, the person involved is very important. People might say, you helped me with that issue about my slave, but you hurt me in the case of my father. In the same way, they'll compare other situations where differences can be found. If the difference is small, they'll pretend not to notice it. Even if the difference is big, if it doesn't affect their duty and loyalty, the good person will overlook it, as long as the injury only affects them personally. To sum it up, the good person will be generous when striking a balance. They'll allow too much credit to go against the inquiry. They won't want to repay a favor by balancing it with an injury. They'll lean toward wanting to be indebted for the favor and not to repay it. Anyone who enjoys receiving a favor more than repaying it is mistaken. Just as someone who repays a loan feels like someone who borrows, someone who frees themselves from debt of a favor received should feel more joyful than someone who
We should
takes
hit
on
level
an
28 in here.
obligation. Ungrateful people make another mistake. They have to repay their creditors both the original amount and the interest. But they think favors are something they can use without paying interest. So the debt grows with delay, and the longer they wait, the more they owe. A person is ungrateful if they repay a favor without interest. So, interest should also be considered when comparing what you received and what you've given. We should try in every way to be as grateful as possible. Gratitude is good for us, in a way that justice, which is usually thought of as something that concerns others, isn't. Gratitude benefits us directly. There isn't a person who, when they've helped their neighbor, hasn't also helped themselves. I don't mean just because the person you help might want to help you back, or because someone you defended might want to protect you, or because a good example can come back around to benefit you, just as bad examples come back to harm those who serve them. The true reward for all virtue lies in the virtue themselves. Virtues aren't practiced for something more. The reward of doing good is simply having fun. I feel grateful so that my neighbor, motivated by my kindness, might be more willing to help me in the future, simply because it's a pleasant and beautiful act. I feel grateful not so that my neighbor, motivated by my kindness, might be more willing to help me in the future, but simply because it's a pleasant and beautiful act. I feel grateful not because it benefits me, but because it pleases me. And to prove this, I declare that even I could be grateful without seeming ungrateful. Even if I could only return a favor by doing something that looks like harm, I would still strive calmly toward the role and honor demands, even amidst the distress. No one, I believe, values virtue more highly but is more dedicated to it than the person who loses their reputation for being just to keep from losing the approval of their own conscience. As I've said, being grateful is more beneficial to you than to your neighbor. Like the favor they gave, you've had a great experience that comes from a truly happy state of mind, the feeling of gratitude. If wickedness makes people unhappy and virtue makes them blessed, and if gratitude is a virtue, then the return you've made is just normal. But the feeling you've gained is priceless. The consciousness of gratitude, which belongs only to a divine and blessed soul. The opposite feeling, however, brings immediate misery. No ungrateful person will be unhappy in the future. I say they are unhappy right now. So let's avoid being ungrateful, not for the sake of others, but for our own sake. We do wrong, only the smallest and lightest part of it affects our neighbor. The worst and heaviest part stays with us and troubles us. My teacher Artoris used to say, evil itself takes the largest portion of its own poison. The poison that snakes carry to harm others and secrete without harming themselves is not like this poison. This kind is ruinous to the one who possesses it. The ungrateful person tortures and torments themselves. They hate the gifts they've accepted because they have to repay them, and they try to downplay their value. They actually exaggerate the injuries they've received. And what's more miserable than someone who forgets the good done for them but clings to the wrongs? Wisdom, on the other hand, adds grace to every favor and willingly remembers them, delighting in the continual reward. Evil people only enjoy favors for a short time, just while they're receiving them, but the wise person gets lasting and eternal joy from them. They find joy not so much in receiving the favor, but in having received it, and this joy never fades. It stays with them always. They despise the wrongs done to them. They forget them, not by accident, but on purpose. They don't twist everything into something negative or look for someone to blame for every little thing. Instead, they attribute even the wrongs of others to chance. They won't misinterpret a word or a look. They might make light of all misfortunes by interpreting them generously. They don't remember an injury more than a favor. As much as possible, they let their memory focus on the earlier unbanded deeds, never changing their attitude toward those who have treated them well, except in cases where the bad deeds far outweigh the good, and the difference is so obvious that even someone who's trying to ignore it can see it. Even then, they only go as far as to try to return to the way they felt before they received the favor. When the injury is equal to the favor, some positive feeling remains. Just as a defendant is acquitted when the votes are equal, and just as kindness always tries to interpret every doubtful case in the best possible way, the wise person's mind, when someone's merits equal their faults, will stop feeling an obligation, but won't stop wanting to feel it. They act like someone who pays their debts even after they've been legally cancelled. But no one can be truly grateful unless they've learned to scorn the things that drive most people crazy. If you want to return a favor, you must be willing to go into exile, to bleed, to face poverty, or, as it often happens, even to let your innocence be stained and exposed to shameful slander. Being grateful isn't a cheap price to pay. We value a favor highly when we're trying to get it. We value it cheaply after we've received it. You want to know why we forget favors we received? It's because our extreme greed for getting more. We don't think about what we've already obtained, but what we are going to seek next. We're led off course by riches, titles, power, and everything that seems valuable to us but is worthless when judged by its true value. weigh things properly. We should judge them by their true nature, not by their reputation. These things don't have any real grandeur to capture our minds, except for the fact that we've gotten used to admiring them. They're not praised because they deserve to be desired, but they're desired because they've been praised. And when individuals err, create public errors, the public error goes on creating more mistakes in individuals. But just as we accept certain things based on others' opinions, let's also accept this truth that everyone agrees on. Nothing is more honorable than a grateful heart. This idea will be echoed by all cities and races, even those from savage lands. On this point, good and bad people will agree. Some people praise pleasure, some prefer hard work, some say pain is the greatest evil, others say it's no evil at all. Some include riches as part of this evil. Others say that finding wealth has harmed humanity and that no one is richer than the person who has nothing left for fortune to give. Amid all this diversity of opinion, all people will agree that we should give thanks to those who have done well by us. On this question, even the rebellious common crowd will agree. As ungrateful as that they feel they can't be grateful enough. Madness has gone so far that it's become dangerous to give great favors to someone, because the shame of not repaying them might make the person wish they didn't have to. Keep what you've received. I don't ask for it back. I don't demand it. Let it be safe to have given a favor. There is no worse hatred than the kind that comes from the shame of not repaying a favor. Farewell. Letter 82. On the natural fear of death. You've already stopped being worried about you. Which god you ask, have you found to be your guarantee? Let me tell you, it's a god who deceives no one.
Yeah,
So
Jack
that
and the
loves
Beanstalk.
what is right.
Okay, Jack.
Best part of you is on solid ground. Fortune can harm you, but more importantly, I don't worry that you'll harm yourself. Keep going as you've started, and settle into this way of living, not luxuriously, but calmly.
Jack.
I'd rather be in
And
hardship than in
the
luxury. You should
bean.
understand
Here
hardship.
you go, Robert.
as
Jack
most
and the
people
Beanstalk.
living a difficult,
Jack and the
rough, or
Beanstalk.
tough life. We often hear people's lives praised like this when they're unpopular. So-and-so lives in luxury, but by this, they mean he's softened by luxury. For the soul gradually becomes weak and lazy, matching the comfort in which it lives. Isn't it better for someone who is truly strong to become tough instead? These same people who indulge in luxury end up fearing the very thing they've made their lives resemble. There's a big difference between lying around doing nothing and lying buried in a grave. But you say, isn't it better to lie idle than to be caught up in the chaos of busyness? Both extremes should be avoided. Both tension and laziness. I believe that someone who lies on a perfumed couch is no less dead than someone who is dragged along by the executioner's hook. Leisure without purpose is death. It's like a tomb for someone who's still alive. So, what's the point of retreating from life? As if the real causes of our worries didn't follow us everywhere we go. Is there any place where the fear of death doesn't reach? Are there any peaceful spots so well protected and far away that pain can't fill them with fear? Wherever you hide, human problems will surround you with noise. There are many external things that deceive us or weigh us down. And there are many internal things that trouble us even when we're alone. So shield yourself with philosophy, which is like an unbreakable wall. Even though many forces may attack it, fortune can't find a way in. The soul stands on solid ground if it has let go of external things. It's independent in its own stronghold, and every weapon thrown at it falls short. Fortune doesn't have the long reach we think it does. She can only grab hold of those who cling to her. Let's pull away from her as much as we can. We can only do this through understanding ourselves and the natural world. The soul should know where it's going and where it came from. What's good for it and what's bad. What it should seek and what it should avoid. And what reason is. The thing that helps us tell the difference between what's desirable and undesirable. Taming our wild desires and calming our fears. Some people think they've overcome these fears by themselves, without the help of philosophy. But when something unexpected happens, they are forced to admit they were wrong. But those 4 words disappear when the torturer tells them to stretch out their hands, and when death gets closer. You might say to such a person it was easy for you to challenge troubles when they weren't close by, but now pain is here. The pain you said you could handle. Now death is there. The death you spoke about so bravely. The wind cracks, the sword flashes. Now, Aeneas, you must be strong and brave. However, the strength will only come from constant practice if you train not just your words but your soul, and if you prepare yourself to face death. Don't expect encouragement from those who try to convince you with their tricky arguments that death is not bad. For I enjoy poking fun at the absurdities of the Greeks, which to my surprise I still haven't completely shaken off. Our master Zeno uses a syllogism like this: no evil is glorious, but death is glorious. Therefore, death is no evil. Well done, Zeno. I'm cured of my fear. Now I won't hesitate to offer my neck to the executioner. But shouldn't you be speaking more seriously instead of making a dying man laugh? Honestly, Lucilius, I couldn't tell you whether the person who thought he was quenching the fear of death with this argument was more foolish, or the one who tried to refute it, as if it had anything to do with the real issue. For the refuter himself came up with a counter-syllogism, based on the idea that we consider death as indifferent, one of those things the Greeks call nothing. Nothing, he says, that is indifferent can be glorious. Death is glorious. Therefore, death is not indifferent. You see the tricky fallacy in this argument. Mere death isn't glorious, but a brave death is glorious. And when you say nothing that is indifferent is glorious, I agree, but I also say that nothing is glorious except in how it deals with indifferent things. I classify as indifferent, neither good nor bad, things like sickness, pain, poverty, exile, and death. None of these things is glorious by itself, but nothing can be glorious without them. For we don't praise poverty, but the person who poverty can't break or bend. Nor do we praise exile, but the person who goes into exile with the same spirit he would have had if he were sending someone else into exile. We don't praise pain, but the person whom pain can't conquer. We don't praise death, but the person who dies without letting death overwhelm his soul. All these things are not in themselves honorable or glorious, but any one of them, when touched by virtue, becomes honorable and glorious because of virtue. They are neutral, and what matters is whether wickedness or virtue takes hold of them. For example, the death that was glorious for Cato was disgraceful for Brutus. Brutus was sentenced to death, tried to get a delay. He took a moment to relieve himself, and when he was called to die in order to bare his throat, he said, "I'll bare my throat, but only if I can live." What madness is it to try to escape when there's no way to turn back? "I'll bare my throat, but only if I can live," he almost said, even under Antony. This man indeed deserved to be condemned to life. But as I was saying, you see that death itself is neither good or bad. Cato faced death most honorably, while Brutus faced it most shamefully. Anything, when you add virtue to it, takes on a glory it didn't have before. We talk about a sunny room, even though the same room is pitch dark at night. It's the day that fills it with light, and the night that takes the light away. And it's the same with things we call indifferent or neutral, like riches, strength, beauty, titles, kingship, and their opposites. Death, exile, illness, pain, and all such evils that we fear to varying degrees. It's wickedness or virtue that gives these things the name of good or evil. An object isn't inherently hot or cold. It becomes hot when thrown into a furnace and cold when dropped into water. Death is honorable when connected to something honorable, like virtue and a soul that despises the worst hardships. Furthermore, there are vast differences among the qualities we call neutral. For example, death isn't as indifferent as whether your hair is worn evenly or unevenly. Death belongs among those things that aren't really evils but still seem like evils, because we have within us a love of self, a desire to live and to protect ourselves, and a fear of dissolution, because death seems to take away us away from the abundance we're used to. There's also another factor that makes us shy away from death. We don't know the future we're heading into, and we fear the unknown. Moreover, it's natural to fear the underworld, where death is thought to lead us. So, although death is something indifferent, it's not something we can easily ignore. The soul must be toughened through long practice so that it can learn to face the sight and approach of death. Death should be despised more than it usually is. We believe too many of the stories about death. Many thinkers have worked hard to make death seem more terrifying. They've described the prison of the underworld and the land covered in everlasting light, where within his blood-stained cave Hell's huge god sprawls his ugly length of half-crunched bones and terrifies the disembodied ghost with a never-ceasing bark. Even if you can prove that these are just stories and that the dead have nothing to fear and that the fear sneaks in, the fear of going to the underworld is matched by the fear of going nowhere. Given these beliefs, which have been drilled into us for so long, how could facing death bravely be anything other than glorious, worthy of being considered one of the greatest accomplishments of the human mind? The mind will never rise to virtue if it believes that death is evil, but it will rise if it believes that death is indifferent. It's not natural for someone to face a destiny with courage if they believe that destiny is evil. They'll approach it slowly and reluctantly, but nothing glorious can come from hesitation and cowardice. Virtue does nothing under compulsion. Moreover, no action is honorable unless the person doing it is fully committed to it and puts their whole heart into it without any part of them repelling. When someone faces something they believe to be evil, either out of fear of worse evils or in hope of achieving something important enough to make the evil bearable, their judgment is pulled into two directions. One side is the reason to act, and on the other is the reason to hold back because of fear of danger. As a result, they're torn between the two, and when this happens, the glory of action is lost. Virtue carries out its plans only when the spirit is in full agreement with itself.
We're back.
Can't go still braver if you believe those things are real evils. Remove this belief from your soul, or else your fears will keep you holding back, preventing you from moving forward like a soldier. Some in our school would say that Zeno's argument is incorrect, but the second argument I mentioned, which is set against us, is deceptive and wrong. But I refuse to reduce such important questions to mere logical rules, or to the subtle tricks of an outdated system. Away with all that nonsense that makes someone feel trapped when asked a question, forcing them to agree to a premise and then making them say something they don't actually believe. When truth is at stake, we must act more openly, and when we're combating fear, we must act more boldly. These questions, which the dialecticians twist into complexities, I prefer to solve and weigh rationally, with the goal of convincing rather than forcing agreement. When a general is about to lead an army into battle, an army ready to face death for their wives and children, how will he inspire them? I remind you of the Fabi, who took on a war that concerned the whole state by themselves. I point out to you the Spartans standing in the pass at Thermopylae. They had no hope of victory, no hope of returning. The place where they stood was to be their grave. What words would you use to encourage them to block the way with their bodies, to take on the destruction of their entire tribe, and to retreat from life rather than the ghost? Would you say that which is evil is not glorious, but death is glorious, therefore death is not evil? What a powerful speech. After such words, who wouldn't throw themselves onto the enemy's spears and die where they stood? But take Leonidas. How bravely he addressed his men. He said, "Fellow soldiers, let us have breakfast, knowing that we shall dine in Hades." The food didn't stick in their mouths or catch in their throats or slip from their fingers. They eagerly accepted the invitation to breakfast and to supper as well. Think too of the famous Roman general. His soldiers had been sent to seize a position, and as they were about to make their way through a huge enemy army, he said to them, "You must go now, fellow soldiers, to take that place from which there is no must about you returning." You see, then, how straightforward and commanding virtue is, but how can your tricky logic make anyone more courageous or upright? Rather, it weakens the spirit, which should never be more free and confident than when planning something great. It's not just the 300, it's all of humanity that needs to be freed from the fear of death. But how can you prove to all these people that death isn't an evil? How can you overcome the beliefs we've all had in our lives? Beliefs we've had since we were born. What help can you offer for our human weakness? What can you say to make people rush eagerly into danger? What persuasive speech can you use to turn aside this universal fear? Or what clever argument can you use to change the long-held conviction of the human race? Will you offer me catchy phrases or string together some tricky logic? It takes great weapons to strike down great monsters. Remember the fierce serpent in Africa that terrified the Roman legions more than the war itself? It couldn't be harmed by arrows or slings. It couldn't even be wounded by Defias, because its enormous size and toughness made spears and any weapon thrown by humans bounce off. It was finally destroyed by rocks as big as millstones. So are you throwing weak arguments like yours against death? Can you stop a charging lion with a tiny tool like an owl? Your arguments may be sharp.
Alright
but there's
guys, we
nothing
made it to level 28. Be good.